Catalyst, will you help me welcome to the stage Father Ed Leahy? So good to have you here.
It's good to be here.
I
You
forgot.
get as old as I am, though, it's good to be anywhere.
I forgot my robe, so sorry. Hey, we just saw a little bit of the energy in the room, in the building, in the school. This is like off the cuff, but would you, like, before we even jump into the story, would you maybe do a little bit of that for us?
Yeah, sure. It's interesting about that affirmation, that every time it led up to the proclamation of faith, I always wanted me a hero. Now I got me a hero. Thank you, Jesus, was the next thing that they cut. And it happened several times in there. I can tell it because I know what goes on every day. But one of the things that may help you is just to say to yourself, you can say it out loud, I am somebody.
I am somebody.
Somebody great. Because Jesus died for me. I can do all things in Christ, who strengthens me. I can't lose for winning. For with God before me, who can be against me? But if I don't love, I am nothing. I was designed for accomplishment. Engineered for success. And endowed with the seed of greatness. I will stay up. I won't let nothing get me down. Stay up. You're not bad. Woo!
I want to jump into your story. You obviously the school's in Newark, in New Jersey, on the East Coast, and that's where you grew up. Tell us a little bit of the leading up for you, childhood, growing up there, the connection to the school.
Sure. I grew up about 12 miles, 14 miles south of Newark, in an all-white suburban community, about a block away from the church. Anytime the pastor of the church needed something, my parents said, go do it. So I had to go to no matter whether I wanted to or not, that didn't seem to have much meaning in the whole thing, just go to the church. So I grew up in the church in a completely, well, virtually totally white town. And then I went to St. Benedict's and had the opportunity. For 4 years, I graduated in 1963 and eventually went back to live there in 1969 after I had entered the monastery. The city was changing, becoming more and more young men of color and families of color. And I was raised a second time by God's grace. I was raised by the African-American community in Newark that taught me little by little. One Sunday at church, I said something, and I was a typical white suburban guy having grown up, and somebody shouted at me in church. And when they did, I started to say more, right? And the more I said, the more they shouted and encouraged me, and little by little they taught me how to say a word that might be helpful to them in their reality. So I've been raised twice. Once in a suburban white community by an intact family, a nuclear family, and then a second time in the middle of Newark by the African American, and then more recently by the Latino community.
Shout out to the Latinos in the house.
Tenemos Latinos aquí.
Muy bien. Yeah, I'm that guy. Sorry. You grew up in the school, St. Benedict's Prep. It had a pretty rough season, almost closing. In fact, it did close. Talk about that season of transition. You've mentioned before there was one gentleman that was really the catalyst in many ways for making sure that things kept going.
So the school closed in 1972, essentially because the rebellion, the uprising, the riots. I mean, you've experienced them here nobody's here old enough to remember probably, but in the 60s. History has characterized it different ways, but the school winds up closing essentially because of race. And it even seeped into our religious community, our monastery, not surprisingly, and because race is America's original sin, huh? And so the school winds up closing. And we never had, those of us in the monastery, never had any intention of reopening it. We wanted, though, after a year, we decided that we were going to try to do some educational venture in Newark. And we wanted to steal things from what St. Benedict's was, but to make something different. And one night at a parents' meeting, this is what I think you're referring to, at a parents' meeting, Carl Lamb, who was an African-American father of Carl Lamb Jr., who was in the class of 1978, he said to me, "Father Ed, how come it was good enough to be St. Benedict's prep when it was all of you? But now that it's all of us," meaning African Americans, "now that it's all of us, how come it can't be St. Benedict's prep anymore?" So I looked at him and I said, "Mr. Lamb, St. Benedict's prep will reopen tomorrow morning." And so everybody likes to say that the monks, that Father Edwin reopened St. Benedict's prep. I did not reopen St. Benedict's prep. Carl Lamb Sr. reopened St. Benedict's prep. And what it taught us early on in this experiment was to if there's any friends here in a group this big, there's probably friends of Bill Wilson here, self-help groups, right? And friends of Bill Wilson will tell you to take the cotton out of your ears and stick it in your mouth, and which is a little bit more polite way of saying shut up and listen. We learned that early to just, if we kept our mouths shut and listened, that the community within which we lived would teach us how we could be of service to them. And an interesting point is, when we first reopened, we were all in the monastery, we were all white. The school was virtually all African Americans. And we had this idea that, believe it or not, this is what Devon was talking about as well, preaching about, is that we didn't teach religion when we first reopened the school, until parents began to say, "We're not good enough," or "You don't value it enough that you want to transmit it and share it with us." So people have taught us how we can accompany them through life, and that's all we're trying to do, is walk with in our case, walk with teenagers through a very, very difficult and dangerous time of life. Right? And for where we live, in the middle of Newark, it's very dangerous for teenagers. So accompaniment is what we're all about.
Talk about the average student walking in. I mean, what they're coming into.
Struggling with absent parents, absent fathers frequently, enormous anger that's created in young men. For all the moms that are here, you know, your voice, mom, gets real old when I'm dealing with mostly with all boys, right? Your voice gets real old when he gets to be 14 or 15. That doesn't mean that you're supposed to stop saying it, but if you don't have somebody else that can moderate that voice, if dad's not there, huge conflicts begin to happen, huge. And mom starts to cling even tighter, and he's trying to run, and it's dangerous. It's really dangerous. And the anger that gets created in that affects everything that a guy does. So we see guys that little by little destroy themselves. You can take that anger and either act it out, or you turn it in on yourself and destroy yourself. All in an attempt to get the attention frequently of the person who's absent. So the big trick is to try to get kids to realize you can't change him. And you can't change mom if mom's even a substance abuser. That's the bad news. The good news is you can change you. And if you change you, then somebody else may see that and begin to think about changing themselves. So that's essentially what we try to do. We have a pretty extensive counseling center where we direct our guys, and I took one over the other day. I pushed him through the door because he's been with us for two and a half years, and his grades are a disaster, and he's angry as all get out, and his situation at home is difficult. And I haven't been successful trying to talk to him about going, so I finally got behind him and walked him across the property and shoved him through the door. And there are a bunch of kids sitting in this room with a meeting, a self-help meeting. There's a group of guys that call themselves unknown sons because they have a fractured relationship with their father or no relationship with their father or don't even know who their father is. And I said, is anybody in here that knows anything at all about anger as a result of an absent parent? So all the hands go up. I said, maybe you can help him. And I slammed the door and left.
I love it. One of the things that I think so many folks like Scott Pelley from 60 Minutes are showing up and going, really?
Yeah.
Like, really, Father Ed? Is the culture that you're creating. Give us some insight into the way that the school is run, because this is mind-blowing to many of us who are outside of that context.
So when I was at school there, Brett, when I was a student there, Brad, everything was run from the top down. Churches run this way sometimes as well, right? From the top down.
No.
And somebody knows what I'm talking about here today.
Yeah.
Don't make me start to preach.
Come on.
If you shout, there's no telling what might happen here, so relax. Take it easy.
Preaching, white boy.
So, what was your question again?
Talk about the culture.
Yeah, the attitude in the place is, number one, don't do for a teenager what a teenager can do for himself. Most of us, especially those of us who are adults who are type A personalities, we like to make a list every morning. Are there any list makers? If you're a list maker, say amen. So if you're a list maker, you get to the end of the day and you looked at your list and you can see if you checked off everything. If you missed one thing, you're just uncomfortable about it. And the problem is that we take that attitude when we work with young people and we impose it on them. And so if you have a list of 30 things that you want to do in a day, if a young person, a teenager, may have to take 30 days to solve one problem. And the adults need to step back and allow that process to happen. So one of the things that we do is create leadership among the students. The kids run the school. If you saw the rest of the 60 Minutes piece, you would have encountered the 3 students who are in that piece, one of whom was the senior group leader who ran the school last year. He's now a freshman in college. The outgoing class of leaders select the leaders coming in behind them, so the adults don't have to do anything. The students perpetuate the system. And there are dozens of leadership possibilities within the school that begin the minute you walk in. So what we try to do, and I think what we need to do in our churches, if we're leaders, is first of all, if you're a leader, you don't have to be the smartest person in the church. You just have to be smart enough to get real smart people around you. Right? And so that the leadership in the school is done by the students. And we try to stay out of their way. So if it's a good year, the leaders they come usually from the senior class, will just kind of push the adults out of the way and say, let us handle this. And
that works?
Yeah, it works. It's crazy. It's risky. It's a very, very risky business, because when people come to our school and I say it's risky, they think, am I going to get stabbed or am I going to get shot or something? And no, but when you put that responsibility in the hands of teenagers who have partially developed brains, because what we know about neuroscience now, our brain doesn't completely develop until we're in our early 20s. So it's very risky when you've got, you may do this with the teenagers in your church. You know, like, what were you thinking? They weren't. They're handicapped. That's what you have to understand. Because their brain doesn't work the way yours works, because it's not fully developed yet. So that's what makes it risky. When you put that responsibility to the everyday running of the school in the hands of teenagers, you have major, major foul-ups. And then you get the opportunity, though, to debrief the foul-up and get to ask the questions of what would have been a better way to deal with that. We make all our freshmen do an outdoor challenge in order to successfully complete 9th grade. They have to backpack the Appalachian Trail in New Jersey, which is a 55-mile hike. This is part of the school year, right? And in order to move into membership in the school, you have to finish this hike. Well, we've had guys study it. There's a big preparation period that leads up to it. Map reading, first aid, cooking, all kinds of things to be able to take care of yourself out there. And from the very first steps that the group was taking, they were going in the wrong direction. They walk in groups of 8. There's a leader, student leader, a peer, who's the leader of the group. Adults are out there, but they're out there as chaperones. So if you happen to be the unlucky adult who just started in the wrong direction, now if you're in most places, the adult will say, stop, we're going the wrong way. But you can't do that if you're going to value the teenager's process. So that you just start walking in the wrong direction. And then working at formulating the right questions to get them to reconsider.
I love it.
Now, if you get a strong-willed leader in the group, when you say, are you sure, guys, do you think we ought to check the map? The strong leader is going to say, no, I know we're going the right way, and you just keep walking. So we've had situations where it's taken hours to get them to actually figure out that they may be going the wrong way. And then you've got to turn around and walk all the way back, and then do what you were scheduled to do that day. So it's a long walk. It happens on a regular basis, but which may say something about our instruction initially, but the instruction is also given by kids who have done the trail before them, right? So it's this whole system that works with trying to provide. One of the problems in this country is that we don't either help young people to discover their voice or to amplify their voice. That's why for me, when I got the invitation to come here and to be in the presence of a whole bunch of young Christians who are committed to the Lord, I hate to fly. I hate flying because I like to control things, you know.
No.
And flying for us who like to control things is a real nightmare. But I flew all the way across the country so I could be encouraged by you, by your commitment to the Lord.
Thank you. One of the things, too, that I think is so powerful about the culture you have created is that you actually encourage and you provoke many times opportunities for arguing among the students.
Yeah. If it gets too quiet at our place for too long, one of us will start a fight. Because when you don't feel like you have a voice, and this is a big problem in our culture right now in our country, that if you don't feel like you have a voice, you kind of let circumstances and life just roll over the top of you, and you become invisible and anonymous and feel like you don't have any meaning or any worth for the larger community. So to discover your voice is what really has to happen. And if it gets too calm and too quiet, we'll provoke an argument. And if you're good enough at it, this will work in the church. If you're good enough at provoking the argument that you're willing to lose to a young person, then all of a sudden they say, wow, someone is paying attention to me. My opinion does matter. And I'm able to change the way somebody thinks. So to provide these opportunities for young people to have a voice, especially, my experience as an adult, and I've been around a long time, I'm closer to 80 than I am to 60. So it's young people of color feel like they've got no voice. And in order to get heard, you have to act out in some way that people then say, well, that's the way they are. And allowing people to have a voice, young people, black and brown people, to have a voice that moves people, that changes the way things are, is really very important, and that's what essentially what we're trying to do.
So good. And the success story it speaks for itself. 98%, I believe, is the current stat of
Going to college.
Yeah. But which is unbelievable. I know you have your own sense of the measurement of success in terms of your role. Talk about.
So I just got word. I just got word when I was out here that one of our seniors just got admitted to Harvard. Another one just the Ivies just came in, right? Today or yesterday was the date where they send out their acceptances. So one at Harvard, one at Princeton, one at Cornell, and everybody wants to. That's the question everybody asks. What percentage of your guys go to college? 98%, but that's relatively meaningless for me. Number one, it's not difficult to get young men in college because young men are disappearing in college in this country. You could fill most every university in this country with qualified women. Now, universities and colleges, therefore, are doing affirmative action to keep their male population up. So they're rejecting qualified women to take less qualified men. When I say that, when I say you can fill every university with women, you folks are great. Lots of women will jump up and say, that's terrific, until you stop and think, who am I going to live my life with? If I have a master's degree and he didn't get out of high school, how are we going to live? How are we going to raise a family? How are we going to have a community? It's a big problem. So getting guys, when you look at ethnicity, Latinos, African Americans in college, the numbers get really bleak really fast. So I understand we have an obligation to give kids, young people, that opportunity to go to college. But for me, that's not what's important. What's important, the measuring line for me of what we're doing is whether our guys can come back and introduce me to their kids. Because many of them, when they were students with us, could not have been introduced to me by their fathers, right? Because their fathers weren't present. So when they can come back, so when they can come back and introduce me to their kids, then I know that what we're doing works, and I've had the opportunity, the privilege, because I've been doing it for 45 years. I've had the privilege of being able to help raise lots of sons of our guys that I worked for. As headmaster, I worked for them when they were kids, and now I have their kids. I tell them when I get your grandchildren, I'm quitting.
One of the terms you all use often, and all the time, is community. And we think we know about community. We're in the business of community and trying to be community transformers and create community. That is really important to you. And just unpack that one a little bit.
So community is important. The community of the church is important, not just to be church, but to be a sign. It seems to me that's what we try to do in our monastery, and on the grounds of the school. We have a fence that's around the abbey, and everybody thinks, oh, is that to keep the monks in, or is it to keep bad people out? And it's neither. It's to mark off in the middle of Newark. If you drew a circle around Newark, you'd probably put the compass point on our roof. We're right in downtown Newark, and it marks off holy ground. So that, that what goes on there is different than what goes on outside the fence. So that we can be a sign to the city of what? A sign of faith. How do people come to faith? How did you come to faith? How did I come to faith? You can see it if you see the signs of faith. The signs of faith are love and communion. Different kinds of people who can live in love of one another as we are. That's the key. To love the other the way the other is. Now, frequently, what we'll love the other as long as I can tinker with him or with her. You know? It'd be a lot easier to love you if you would only do this, or if you'd only act that way. And when you act that way, you don't act that way, you drive me crazy. But that's not what the Lord said. The Lord said, love one another as I have loved you. How did he love us? All the way to the cross. All the way to the cross. How? As we are. The Lord went to the cross for me as I am today. And I know how I am. And it's not always pleasant. I know what my sins are. I know what distracts me. I know what gets in my heart sometimes. And in spite of who I am, God loves me. And loves me in Jesus. And Jesus loved me in the dimension of the cross. So if you have a community that's loving one another in the dimension of the cross, suffering for the other, accepting the other's weaknesses, accepting the other's shortcomings, accepting the other's sins, and still loving them, then somebody can look at that and say, well, that's impossible. That's impossible humanly. That must be the Holy Spirit present there. When the Spirit's present and faith is demonstrated, then others can come to faith. So our churches need to be not just buildings and not just people come together to worship, but to be a sign. I don't know how you worship in your church. I won't sit next to her. You don't know what she said about me 20 years ago, Father. What's he doing here? You know how he is. What's he doing coming to church? Got quiet in here all of a sudden, saints.
Sure did, yeah. Weren't many amens on that one.
All of a sudden, must not like what I'm saying, but that's all right. God likes it. It's the truth.
Yeah. This theme of uncommon fellowship, you may be in many ways equally or more than the best representation. Here you are a wise, older,
man. Say it, go ahead, say it.
White male in the middle of a school with 550, give or take, black and Hispanic young men.
Correct.
That is uncommon fellowship. A lot of us hear this and we're leaning in going, I want to be part of the solution. I may just not know how to do that. What would be your advice? What would you pass on to us as leaders based on what you've learned?
I think that's a great question, Brad, but I think find ways that you can experience somebody else's reality, to live that reality. The advantage that I have is I live in town. So the sufferings of town, we feel. The rejoicings of town, we feel. So how do you move, depending on where your church is geographically situated, how do you move that to experience the reality of suffering people? And to experience the talents and the joys of people. I think that's one of the things that's been a help to us, that our place is like a diner. Diners are famous in New Jersey and New York. Right? We're open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, because we live there. And kids run away from home, and they run to us. I can tell you a funny story. Puerto Rican student with us, he couldn't come to church. Any Puerto Ricans? Boricuas, huh? 100% Boricuas. He told me that we have church service on Saturday night. He was part of a youth group that comes to the church service. He told me he couldn't come because his grandmother was here from Puerto Rico. I said, okay, I understand. You have to be with your grandmother. So after the service, I took some kids home, and I'm on my way driving back at 10:30 at night, and my phone rings. And I answer it, and it's the head of our guidance office, Dr. Lamort, who's also Puerto Rican himself. And he says, hey, boss, I ain't calling to say goodnight. We got a problem. I said, what's the problem? He said, there's a big party on the east side of the city. There's alcohol involved. There's girls in the party, which is always a bad combination, alcohol with so many bad things happening around alcohol and when our inhibitions drop, right? And I said, what are we doing? He said, we're going. So we get 4 or 5 of us get in the car. We call one of our alums who's a cop on the job, and he happened to be on duty, so he's going to roll up with his partner on this party. We get down there. The house where the party was in the middle of the block. And I look down and on the porch, all tangled up with some girl, is Eli, who was supposed to be home with his grandmother. So I said, this is too good to be true. So I got out of the car up at the corner and went across the street and got up against the buildings out of the street lights. And it was a risk to see if I could pull it off, but I got all the way down, and now I was directly across the street from Eli. And he was so focused on her that he didn't know what was going on around him. So I walked across the street, and I was standing right over the top of him. And I said to him, she looks a little young to be your grandmother. Now, I didn't have my habit on, so the poor girl didn't know who I was. She took off down the street. And he was pulling on his hair and going, he didn't know what to say. So we threw him in the back of the radio car, and the cops went in the door, and everybody started pouring out, and we just picked off our guys. We threw him in the radio car, and there's somebody in here who's been in the back of a radio car, I'm sure, and it's cramped, right? And we hauled them back to school and called their parents, and that's never a good thing on a Saturday night to have your parents having to come at midnight to pick you up when you're not in great shape. So that's kind of the things that go on with us. There's a million stories like that, some of which can't be told, but that one could be at least.
Is it too late for you to run for Secretary of Education? Can we vote him in? You probably don't want that job. Hey, before we take off, first of all, thank you. You are, gosh, so inspiring, and we are for you. We're with you. This community loves you, and we want to do everything we can to support what you're doing. We're inspired by this story and by you as a leader. I would love for us to finish just like we started. If you would lead us out with another one of the affirmation credos. I think I'm probably saying it wrong, but what we saw in the video there, let us experience some of what happens in the school maybe as we wrap up this conversation.
Okay, thank you, Brad, for the opportunity. And we end our morning meeting. Every morning the whole school meets. We pray together. We make announcements, do attendance so we know who's there and who's not. In a community that's made up essentially of Christians, but there's a significant Muslim population in the school, some Jewish kids, some Hindus, trying to live in communion and in love as a sign of faith to people. So one of the things that we do at the end of the meeting on, not every day, but some days, is something like this. Turn to the person next to you and say, I love you.
I love you.
You're worth it.
You're worth it.
You can be any good thing you want to be in life. If you believe in the God inside of you. This is all I know about you. You can't change my mind. I know I'm talking to a winner. Now, since you're a winner, always remember to smile. I don't know what you're going to do with the rest of your day. But I'm going to enjoy my day. Because this is the day that the Lord has made. And I will rejoice and be glad in it. So today, you go and conquer. Courage. Ánimo, hermanos. Ánimo. Thank you. Pray for us. Thanks, Tom.